Knobloch's Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, process production and social media. Hey knowers, welcome to our podcast. We are Knobloch's Dance, a social media-based company. We strive to say no to the box. We connect interdisciplinary art, technology, and artists to re-envision the process of art making and sharing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. We're your co-hosts, Reyna Mondragon
and Azaria.
And today we got to interview Matthew Cumbie.
Yeah, Matthew Cumbie is a collaborative dance maker and artist educator. He's based in Washington, D.C., and he focuses his work around the LGBTQ+ community. And he's also the founder of the Cubmie Projects.
It was so awesome getting to interview him today. We got a bunch of details waiting for you, but before you go ahead and listen, we do want to shout out his Facebook at Matthew Cumbie. You can find him on Instagram at Matthew Cumbie as well. He has a Vimeo, a YouTube account, and his website, MatthewCumbie.com. So check it out.
Enjoy the show. Hi, Matthew. It's so great to have you back with us, or back with us personally, but new to the podcast series. How have you been?
Thanks for having me. I'm good. You know, I feel like the answer I give to a lot of folks is I'm hanging in there, because I feel like that's the experience of a lot of us. But I think all things considered, I'm actually doing really, really well. And it's nice to be in some sort of shared space with the both of you too. So thanks for having me.
Before we continue digging deeper, for some of our audience who don't know you yet, tell us who Matthew Cumbie is. Like, who is Matthew Cumbie as a dancer, performer, choreographer, advocate, like human? Who are you? Human. Yeah.
I like all of those words. Those are good words. So I don't know. It's interesting. I automatically wanted to slip into my bio boilerplate language, which is just something to notice. No, so I'm a dance maker, a choreographer, and an artist educator. A lot of the work that I do really grows out of community engagement, centering community in the work. It also pulls a lot on my improvisational dance performance background. And in the current iteration, the current kind of model that I work with, like I said, is really kind of on a project by project basis. And so when we're not in a pandemic, I've got work here in DC. A lot of that is really rooted in the relationships that I've built and the partnerships that I've built collaborating with LGBTQ+ organizations and artists. So I'm often leading weekly movement sessions at the Whitman Walker Health Clinic, which is a local LGBTQ affirming health clinic. But I'm also doing work that stretches up into different parts of New England. And certainly because I'm from Texas, I feel a strong pull to continuing to do work with collaborators and partners in Texas too. So that's a little bit. I do think a lot, I think really central to what excites me is this idea of participation in a creative process and kind of trying to find uncommon partners or unsuspecting partners to do that work with. And so often the people that are in the work with me don't always see themselves or think of themselves as dancers.
Right.
Which is always exciting. And then I think another thing within that participation is, like a real emphasis on arts education too. And my work as an artist educator, I think really lives alongside and is embedded within my work as a choreographer as well.
For some of the audience who haven't met you yet, my experience with Matthew Cumbie has been like, you come up, you shake my hand, and you directly look me into my eyes, and immediately there's this connection happening, and you I'm hooked. I'm like, who are you? And then you start creating work based on on that, even just it feels like you're starting to create work based on that simple experience of a greet, of that simple collaboration of just how to say hello to one another. And so, yeah, like, I mean, what do you
Yeah. There's a lot that I want to say in response to that. Thank you. The first thing, this is something that I say a lot, actually, when I'm leading a workshop or leading a class. For me, so much of what we do in the studio is really rooted in the fact that dance is a social act, that like when you look at how movement and dance have been a part of communities historically, it's often something that brings people together. And I think even before I identified as a dancer, growing up and then particularly coming out as a queer person, so much of how I found that sense of self, that sense of identity, that sense of space to kind of root myself in who I wanted to be and who I knew myself to be, it was found by going to bars and dancing. I mean, there's this incredible, I hope it's still there, there's this incredible club, bar, dance space in San Antonio that's like right across from the Alamo. It's called, oh goodness, I'm not going to remember the name of it now. It's on the tip of my tongue. It'll come back to me. But it's 3 floors of social space to get drinks, to go dancing, different kinds of music all throughout. And it was one of the first places where I felt really connected to my body and also really connected to other people. So for me, dance has always been a kind of social act. Beyond that, I just find it so much more exciting personally and so much more interesting to be in work with other people. I have a really hard time going into a studio by myself and trying to make something in isolation. It's not as interesting to me, and maybe that's a place I need to be in a little bit and grow my practice. But for me, being in a circle with other people and moving our bodies and also sharing stories and getting to know more about one another has always been so much more exciting and so much more provocative for me.
I agree too.
You are listening to Navvox Dance.
I think it's important to also just say a little bit about where I come from and all of that, because that certainly informs, I think, how many of us feel the space or the possibility to tap into parts of ourselves or grow parts of ourselves, right? So I grew up outside of Houston, Texas, not an altogether super conservative part of the area, but certainly conservative parts to it.
Right.
But also grew up in a really loving and supportive and incredible family. When I was, I think in high school, was the first time that dancing really caught my eye. And it wasn't necessarily something that I saw for myself, but something that I knew excited me. I think for us on the call, we might know this a little bit more intimately, but I don't know about the kind of listening base. In Texas, it's a huge kind of phenomenon, this idea of dance in high school that manifests as a drill team, kind of precision dance. And my high school certainly had one, a really incredible drill team, dance team. I had lots of friends on it. And I would go to different sporting events for my high school, less because of the actual sporting event that was happening and more to be with friends and to also watch the dance team. And I didn't, in those early days, I didn't understand or know really why I was so interested in this, but it was always something that I looked forward to and always something that kind of struck me leaving the stadium or wherever I happened to be at. Yeah. So I knew that there was something about that that was interesting. At the same time, I was also starting to come to understand myself as not straight. And I want to be clear about that, because identifying as gay was terrifying at that age. So I knew that I wasn't straight, but I didn't necessarily want to claim this other space. And that defined a lot of my high school experience. I didn't end up coming out until I went to college. And I think for me, that was because I needed to be on my own, and I needed to feel that space from my family, from my friends, from the people that had known me in that chapter of my life, to start a new chapter. And it was also in college when I actually found my way eventually into a dance class. My first experience, like dipping a toe into this world that I love so much now. One of the things that I also did a lot of in high school, I was in choir and show choir. And so that was kind of like an inlet into some dancing, right? You know, you got your grapevines, your jazz squares, your classic pivot turns.
Yes.
Had a good time. And I remember deciding somewhere around my senior year that I had this idea. I wanted to become a part of a boy band. Ooh. And in the little bit of research that I did, not a lot, but a little bit of that research, I found that many of the guys that were part of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, which were really big when I was in high school, many of them got their start performing at a local theme park. So I thought that was an excellent next step for me. And this was back when Houston had Astroworld, which was the Six Flags theme park there.
Yeah.
So I got in touch with the entertainment director. We had a good chat. He asked if I danced, and I shared with him I was like, well, I mean, I do show choir, and that's that kind of dancing. And he was like, oh yeah, you should audition to dance too. And so I went to this audition. I brought a friend. She had training. I did not. And I'm so glad she was there, because I showed up thinking it was going to be grapevines and jazz squares and pivot turns. And before I know it, this choreographer is calling out, you know, grand jeté and battement and all these terms that I came to know eventually. But I felt so out of my league and unprepared and in a different world. And it was both at first terrifying and incredibly exciting. I remember going home. I didn't get the job, but I remember going home and feeling alive and feeling connected to my body, but also able to pay attention in a different way to what was happening around me. And so from that point, I knew that I needed to get into a dance class at some point. But it wasn't until I went to college, again, that I found like I had that space to really practice that and to test that out and see what that was like.
I love that story.
And that's how Matthew ended up in a very small, very wonderful dance studio in Seguin, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Taking classes for the first time.
So flash forward, and now you have your own company that is centered around the LGBTQ plus community. How did you get there? I guess how did it feel? Yeah, how does that happen, and why focus on the community and the LGBTQ plus community?
When I was in graduate school working on my MFA at Texas Women's University,
woo woo,
right?
Yeah,
go Pioneers.
Let's go.
I remember my first semester. It was in a class with Jordan Fuchs. I don't remember exactly why I became interested in the topic, but I remember I made a solo about coming out, and that thread of kind of interrogating, I think it was because I really wanted to start to turn a bit more inwards and understand to articulate this experience in a different way, this experience of being queer, being a part of the LGBTQ community. There was lots of other things going on in my personal life too that were interesting and informed that. But that became a significant thread for me throughout graduate school, kind of that turning inwards to make and share and put out in a different way so I could look at it and relate to it differently. Fast forward a few years later, I also had this really pivotal experience working with, well, first kind of leading into my work with Dance Exchange, I remember there was a moment, and this is what kind of catalyzed another large performance project, an iterative performance project that I've been working on for a few years. I was living in New York. It was 2011, 2012. It was around the time that New York had just passed its own marriage equality legislation. And I remember being in this apartment room with a former lover of mine and watching the news, and the announcement was made, and he jumps up out of his seat and we go across the street to a bar to celebrate. And I remember sitting there looking at all of these people having such a great time, and their bodies were alive. And I didn't feel that. And that struck me as really odd.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I did more thinking and reflecting on that, and realized, like, I don't think I had access to that experience because in that time I didn't understand the work of what it took to get there. I didn't know who or what had made any of that possible. And it really turned me towards wanting to understand more about not just my experience as an LGBTQ person, but the experiences of my community and the histories of my community. And I started to do that later. I mean, first I did that by looking at books and going to museums, but then when I started to do more work with Dance Exchange, whose work has really, I think, not just the process of how the processes that grow out of the Dance Exchange work, but also the people that find themselves in that organization, the history of that organization. So much of that has informed how I move and make in the world now. So I have to give credit where credit is due there. It was in my time with Dance Exchange where I started to realize that this investigation, this curiosity I was kind of leaning into and needing to know more about, also needed to happen through a making process.
Oh, wow.
So I think all of that led to, it just, for me, I love getting to meet people and make with people in a process, and especially meeting and making with LGBTQ folks has become, really, really important to me, in a lovely kind of outgrowth of the work I make. There are not that many ways and places to connect with people of a different age within our community. And so I think, like, when we think about blood family, or when I like kind of growing up in a religious community, there are so many ways to talk about, to think about, to reflect on, like, where we've come from, because we can read about it in books. We can sit down and talk with someone who's older than us, or sit down and talk about the future with someone who's younger than us. But when it comes to largely many LGBTQ folks, that sense of legacy and lineage is not something we pass on body to body, because there aren't spaces to gather with people that are of a different age. It's the places that most people gather are and cater to very specific parts of our community. And one of the things that I've been thinking about lately, particularly now in relationship to COVID-19, is just how this, for many older adults in this country, there's already a sense of, I think, isolation, because I think this speaks to a larger societal issue, but there are many older adults that might experience some form of isolation because of the community that they're a part of, or where they live. And I think for queer folks, that can be further amplified because of where they live, because of whether or not they have access to technology or the internet, who's in their lives. And I was talking again about this with someone else recently, that experience doesn't always necessarily, it's not unique just to older adults in LGBTQ communities. It's also, like, as a young queer person who is trying to find their way and find a community, I felt, in growing up in Texas, I felt completely cut off from any source of larger group of folks who looked like me, talked like me, wanted the same things I wanted. It was an interesting experience, and it was a lot of work to try and figure out where those people were and how to connect with them.
Wow.
So, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think one of the things that has been really interesting to me in the work that I make as I partner with these different organizations and individuals here where I live is trying to facilitate not just conversations, but the connections to that continue to bring people together even outside of the process.
Yeah, no, that definitely answers the question. And I think it's just important for everyone to be a part of the conversation, because a lot of times if you're within a community, you discuss the issues and the problems, and then you all know about it. But the people who tend to need to know the most don't ever hear it or are not a part of those conversations. So that's also a reason why I want to kind of open it up broadly, so that people who maybe aren't a part of the community or who want to be an ally can have better insight into the issues or the lifestyle that's going on, because you really don't know if you're not a part.
Don't forget to say no to the box.
That's true, and that's really interesting, Azaria. And it has me thinking about the way the internet, the way social media have really shifted and changed how we relate to people, how we have access to certain things. When I think about, so here in DC, over the past few years, as part of this larger body of work that I call Growing Our Own Gardens, which is really all about like exploring and connecting to an intergenerational sense of community or sense of LGBTQ community here. And also a way for me to kind of really root myself in the histories of the LGBTQ plus communities here in DC. One of the things that has grown out of that is this really lovely and exciting partnership and relationship with some folks over at an organization called the Rainbow History Project. And together we've led a number of what we call queer history walks. And so the Rainbow History Project for the last 20 years or so has primarily, their kind of mission is to collect and archive and document the queer histories of Washington, D.C. And they do that through lots of ways, but a main way is through kind of oral history collection and storytelling. And then from those, they have created these like self-guided walking tours throughout different neighborhoods in the city to kind of invite people to get to know where they live, but through a different way. And with that program, one of the Rainbow History Project board members in particular, Jeff Donahoe, and I have gone on a number of walks together where we facilitate for whoever wants to join us. He kind of annotates that history and talks about it, and then I invite people to kind of bring their body into relationship to that through moving and making together.
Oh wow!
I love that.
That's
and
so
so
cool.
it's been a lot of fun, and it's also really, again, like been a way for me to root myself and tap into the histories of this place that I live, and the stories and people that have made so much possible for me here. And so it brings me back to this thinking about how people used to connect here in DC, and I think this was maybe in many places. They would often find or go to bookstores. And in particular here in DC, there were a couple of different LGBTQ plus bookstores where people would go and either post kind of like pre-Craigslist, right? There was a bulletin board where you could post like looking for a roommate or trying to make a book club or whatever it might be. And how I don't know of any current bookstores here in this area, but how that has shifted over time because of, I think, the advent of the internet and social media, and how different it is now to try to connect to a sense of community when you don't have to go anywhere. You can just pick up your phone and log on and find a friend there.
What advice do you have for the younger version of yourself? If you could give yourself any advice, what would it be? The younger version.
Yeah.
I know, that's deep.
So one of the things, and this is no shade to my parents. I love my parents very much. But one of the things that my dad told me a lot growing up was, if you're going to do something, do it right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and out of that, I think, has grown this fear of failure.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
That, and maybe that's why I was drawn to the arts, because I feel like it's not so clear when you're right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not cut and dry at all, right? There's a lot of, it is a place to experiment and play and to fuck around. And so I think the thing, but in thinking about this question, I think the thing that I would say is like to fail more. Because I think there's so much that we learn when we do allow ourselves, it's not even like doing something differently, but giving ourselves the permission to fail, to be okay with the idea of failure, because I think that frees us up from feeling like we have to meet a certain expectation or have something look a certain way, at least for me. And in doing that, then it makes me really curious and excited to see what's possible.
I love it.
Me too. That's so good.
That's so good.
I mean, it's because little Matthew was such a perfectionist.
That's something I still struggle with today. So we're working on it.
Same. Have you read the article, The Bread is Over, Fuck the Bread?
Fuck the bread.
Oh, I've seen it floating around, but I thought it was like about gluten-freeness or something like that. And I'm already gluten-free, so I'm not eating the bread.
I don't got to worry about that. It's less about failure and more about like reframing this idea of success. But I do think like when we talk about success, failure is a part of that, whether or not it's stated. And I think particularly in a time like this pandemic, how we defined anything before this we have to reconsider that. But particularly when it comes to certain notions about success or productivity or even the word work, I think that has to look really different moving forward, because the old ways weren't working. And this article, I think, just does an incredible job of naming that.
I'll definitely go back and read it now that I know it's not about actual bread.
and it's called Fuck the Bread?
Yeah, fuck the bread. The bread is over.
Okay, there you go, everybody. All our listeners, go check that out.
You know we're going to have it posted in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure.
To Martha, yeah. So I think this is a good time to go to our Flash 4 portion, where we ask all of our guests to answer 4 questions in a flash, so as quick as you can.
Okay, you ready?
Ready.
Flash 4.
If you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be?
Resource. Hiking the Horizontal, Liz Lerman. It's a go-to book of mine.
Oh.
Did I say that too fast? Should I say it slower?
No. We got you. What was the first dance you saw?
The first one that resonated with me, I think. I was an undergraduate, and Matthew's had a long collegiate career. My second undergraduate degree. So I was an undergraduate in dance, and I think the first one that like really struck me was Café Mueller by Pina Bausch. I saw it on video. I want to be clear about that. I don't really remember the actual first dance I saw live, unless you count drill team dances, in which case I saw many, many high kick dances.
Of course.
As a high schooler at the football game. Yeah.
All of that counts. I
mean, and I do love a good high kick. That was, so much love for drill team. Oh my goodness.
Do you think social media has a positive influence on the dance world? Yes or no?
Ooh, this is, yeah. Maybe it's an option as well.
I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
Okay.
But I'm also automatically questioning what we mean by positive influence.
It's Flash 4. We'll have to do that on your next interview,
Great.
Matthew.
Great. Do it.
Okay,
Come
finally.
back.
What is your favorite social media platform?
Instagram.
Let's go.
Instagram. Yay!
Instagram. It's just like digestible. Like what I find happens on Facebook, I go onto Facebook with a specific goal, which is why, by the way, if anybody ever messages me on Facebook, I'm so sorry. And the amount of time it will take me to respond to you, because I log on with a specific goal in mind, something catches my eye, and I fall down the Facebook rabbit hole, and 20 minutes later I log off, and then I forgot why I was even there. And that happens with messages too. People will message me, and then it will be weeks before I message them back because I forget.
I feel
Whereas
you.
it's a lot. Whereas Instagram, I can like look and be like, okay, next, cool. Engage and disengage real quick.
I love Instagram for that reason as well. Something about the visuals in Instagram too really captivate me. But is there anything that you would like to share with us that you didn't get to share? That you're like, I have to tell you this because this is so important.
Well, first, I think my connection, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Now we can hear you. You might
Yes,
be
okay.
Yeah, we got to.
There we go. Because what was happening, it was like, as you were talking, Reyna, it kind of got drawn out into some slow motion, and that was just, choreographically, it was really stunning to experience. So that was nice. I think this doesn't have to be included, but one of the things that I'm thinking about now is just because so much of what I do is community centered, and particularly really, and I started making work here in DC about certain parts of DC's history because I wanted to change my relationship to DC in this place that I lived and called home. And when I think about that alongside kind of what's happening right now and how we're all having to really invest in a different way where we live, I'm just really struck by what that means for how we support our local dancers and local artists and local community. And I just feel even more strongly that we as artists need to continue to find ways to support each other, especially when we're neighbors and living alongside one another, but also like the structures that support artists need to really, I think, shift and grow in ways that actually really support, lift up, and elevate the local arts community. So those funders out there, those funding structures out there, I would really invite them to think about how they can better support the people that support them.
Yes, I was saying snaps.
That's
Snaps.
staying in here. Everybody, make sure you're listening. Shout out. Okay,
It was such a pleasure interviewing you today, Matthew. I wish we were all hanging out in person over a cup of coffee.
No, that'd be
I know. That would be nice.
Thanks for taking your time to tune into Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.